Hi, everyone. Welcome to this next CIS Lunchtime Webinar podcast. My name is Christine A.R. Illichman. I am the Communications Coordinator for the School of Information Sciences at Wayne State University. And we're really excited today to feature three podcasters who are going to be able to shed a lot of light into the topic of podcasting and give you information to either help you build on the podcast that you might already be creating, but also to help you get a good idea of where to get started if you are considering podcasting. Our first presenter today is Jo Staal. She has been in education for 20 years. For the first 16 years, Jo was a classroom teacher in 4th and 5th grade. She is currently in her 4th year as an elementary media specialist at Hudsonville Christian School in Hudsonville, Michigan. Jo is about 3 classes away from completing her MLIS at Wayne State, and she has been podcasting book reviews with her students for a little over a year. Our next presenters are Dan Golodner and Troy Eller English. Dan is the host and co-producer of the Tales from the Reuther Library podcast, and he has been the American Federation of Teachers Archivist at the Walter P. Reuther Library at Wayne State since 1997. He graduated from Wayne State with his MLIS in 1996. And Troy is the sound engineer and co-producer of Tales from the Reuther Library and has been the Society of Women Engineers Archivist at the Reuther since 2008. She also records periodic archive-centric episodes for the Society of Women Engineers podcast, which is entitled Diverse. She received her MLIS from Wayne State in 2007. So I believe we're going to go ahead and get started with Jo. Jo, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine. I'm super excited to be here today to share our podcasting information with you. Podcasting has been an adventure at our school. I have to actually give credit to a colleague of mine named Trisha Kiepert, who teaches 1st grade here, and she actually started podcasting with her 1st graders a couple years ago, and she is what inspired several of the rest of us to start in this task and in this process. And it's just been really exciting to see where it's gone and how it's evolved at our school. And we have several different classrooms podcasting now. And it's just been great to give our students a voice and to let them share their learning in a very authentic and real-world way. So my podcast is called Kids Reviewing Books. It's very simple. It's myself and my kindergarten through 5th grade students just sitting down and talking about books. My podcasts last between 3 and 5 minutes, super short, because you know what, kids' attention spans are pretty short. So I had to adjust my podcast to fit my kids. If you are looking for the link, I have my presentation on Google Slides. And I know this got cut off a little bit, but here's the link to the Google Slide presentation, and it's very easy to follow.
You are now unmuted.
And it's all right there.
And I'll also be sharing
at our
that
school,
with them. I'll also send that in a follow-up email so everyone can have it as well.
Excellent. So at our school, in order to do this, we kind of had to justify why we wanted to do this in order to get permission. We really didn't. Our school is great about allowing us to explore different avenues and allowing us to try different things. But we did want to justify why we do this. And so we focused in on technology and how technology can be used in a lot of ways to give students a voice and to verbalize their thinking and to share their thinking with a real-world audience. So that was kind of the avenue we took. It just allows our students to know that their voices are heard. And in a podcast way, it's pretty powerful because I'm able to share their voices with their peers, with their teachers, with their parents, and in many cases, I'm able to share their voices with the authors and illustrators who have written these books. And to allow our students to know that authors are listening to them. And quite often, if I tweet an author a link to the podcast, they'll tweet us back. And the kids just think it's the coolest thing because they know people are listening to them. And it gives them a chance to express themselves. The number one question I'm always asked whenever I talk about podcasting is privacy. I'm dealing with 5-year-olds through 11-year-olds. So how do we protect their privacy online? And so the very first thing I do is I make sure I check through our school's no photo policy, which parents fill out every year. That gives me an idea of what parents are okay with their students being, with their pictures being out there or with not. The wonderful thing about podcasting is that pictures are not associated with it. So right there, it adds a layer of privacy that other mediums cannot. Beyond the photo policy, we don't have an actual permission slip that parents fill out, but I have a feeling that as more and more teachers start to experiment with podcasting, we may have to pursue that permission slip avenue at this point. The number one rule we use, we never use last names. I have several kids who I think if they wanted to podcast and their parents did not want their names associated with it, we could easily do this without even using any names, which is a wonderful tool that their voices can still be heard with the privacy and protection of not even using their names. I make sure that our school name is not included in the podcast description. Could people figure out where we are from? Absolutely they could, but they would have to start listening and do a little research to figure out where we are. And I just have the rule of thumb that when I'm in doubt, I just stay in communication with our administrator, and I just make sure that I keep in contact with him so that he knows what's happening, and that if anything should arise, I know I have his support and his follow through. So why in the world would you want to podcast in the library? Why in the world would you want to take the time to do this in a school setting where we are all busy people? In fact, I'm doing this webinar right now between classes. So how do you find the time, and why do it? At an elementary level, it meets so many Common Core state standards in the areas of language arts because it allows students to verbalize their thinking. It gives students a voice, like I keep saying. It builds their confidence. I run my podcast in a very much conversational way. I always tell the kids that we are just going to sit down and have a conversation about books. And so it's just wonderful to see students who usually don't talk, or students who are very quiet, or students who are very shy. Just the fact that I tell them, it's just us here having this conversation. And you can even see their confidence grow through a single podcast. It's pretty amazing. I have a student who's in 5th grade now, and when he was in 1st grade and 2nd grade and 3rd grade, even last year, he hardly spoke at all. And he's done a podcast with me, and he was so eloquent and was able to express his thoughts on a nonfiction book. And when his teacher played it in the classroom, the students applauded, and they were so excited to celebrate his voice and that he was able to show off his learning as well. I also have found that it's giving students a conversational skills and interview skills. I've had several teachers say to me that when they do book buzzes in their classrooms now, some students have asked if they could do almost like a interview style book buzz, and the teachers have said, some of my kids start to sound like you and the questions you ask, which is a little intimidating, but that's great. If they're learning those skills in this kind of setting, then we're definitely doing more than just podcasting. We're teaching life skills. So it's super exciting. So how in the world do you do this? I know it seems overwhelming, and I know it seems like a big task, but I found a site about a year ago called Anchor. It's actually at anchor.fm. And it is a free site. It has only been around since about 2016, so it's fairly new. But what I love about it, it's free. And that's the biggest thing. Because it's only been around a couple of years, they are continually making adjustments and making improvements. And I was just reading through their site again this morning in preparation for this, and they are a site that's very committed to keeping podcasting free and allowing people to have that voice on the internet. So essentially all I use my computer, I use Anchor FM, and I use my microphone. And really, you could do recording on Anchor without even using a microphone, but at an elementary level, you put a microphone in front of a kid and it ups your coolness factor by quite a bit. So that is all I use. Like I said, you could easily do this on your smartphone, on your tablet. I choose to use my computer because my microphone is a USB microphone. So I can't hook that into my phone. But the great thing is too is that if I wanted to just zip around the school, I could just carry my phone with me and record an episode. Anchor is continuing to make things easier and make things better. They now have editing tools on the app. They didn't have that when I started, but now you can edit right on your phone or your smart tablet. The best thing also about Anchor is that they take care of distributing it to different platforms. So for example, they have distributed my podcast to 10 different platforms. So I'm on Apple Podcasts, I'm on Google Podcasts, I'm on Spotify, Overcast. The nice thing too is that I could also choose just to publish it on Anchor, which means I could also control where it goes. Now, do I know exactly how many people are listening? I actually do. I screenshotted a couple screens of what it looks like on the user end. This is what it looks like on my end when I start sharing it. Essentially, it tells me who's listening. It tells me where they're listening from, and I can share it. They've just started this new thing up at the top about getting paid to podcast. I haven't really looked into that very much yet. It's been a crazy fall, but that's fairly new. And it's so easy to do. I can also see where people are listening to my podcast. Now, I don't have control over where it goes on Apple or who gets distributed. So if you really want a ton of control over who is listening and how it's listening, then Anchor might not be for you. But have I mentioned Anchor is free? Because it's free, and they're pretty committed to keeping it free. And it's easy. Anyone can use Anchor. I mean, I picked it up within 10 minutes. I had it figured out. Essentially, to record a new episode, you just go to the new episode page and you hit record. And then you just select the right microphone and you're good to go. I have a one-take rule, so I don't use the editing very much. I essentially tell the kids, I'm going to hit record, we're going to talk, and whatever happens, happens. And with kids, it leads to some funny situations. And I've only ever had to stop the recording once when a student really didn't even know what book she was talking about, which was kind of great. But other than that, it is so user-friendly. And again, it's free. So even though I have a one-take rule, I do prepare my kids. I'm sorry for the way this kind of ended up on this slide. I do prepare my kids. I have a form they fill out, and they fill this out after they finish a book, and they bring it back to me, and then I send them a little list of when they're going to come and record with me. And it's usually during a recess because that's when they're free, that's when I'm free. And I know a lot of teachers have said to me, well, you give up your recesses to do this? Because my podcast only lasts 3 to 5 minutes, it's very easy to do because I still get a break and they still get a break. And the kids love it. Again, they're short, they're to the point, it's for kids. This document is also on Google Docs. Feel free if you want to use it, edit it, whatever you want to do, feel free to use that document. But the kids also, that gives them an idea of what we're going to talk about, so it's not a free-for-all. This way, I know what questions to ask, they know what's expected of them. And it's kind of funny how kids come in so nervous to many of these recordings, but then they leave feeling great about it. And they're so pumped that they got to talk about a book they read. And it really has created a culture of reading in our school because kids are listening to other kids talk about books. I know our kids would love it if you listened to some episodes. We're very easy to find. Kids Reviewing Books, if you search that and look for my name, you should be able to find it. If you're looking for some of our funnier episodes, I would suggest looking for Dog Man, Lord of the Fleas. That was 2 third graders who just had a riot together. And if you go back in time to a Snapsy the Alligator in November of last year, I believe, those girls were hilarious. But truly, every single one is a celebration of kids reading and kids talking about their books. And really, in this world of kids being so tied to technology, what could be better than listening to kids talk about books? If you're in need of some support for doing this, I have some references for you. If you need to just show why you want to do this and the value behind it, feel free to use those references. And my last slide is also a little bit messed up there, but feel free to contact me. I would love to help you out if you have any questions or if you have further things you're wondering about, I would just love to get you started. I've seen just wonderful things in giving kids that voice and helping them know where to talk to, and that they're listened to. Kids are powerful and they have ideas that can change this world. And so by podcasting with them, I think that allows them to realize they have value and to realize they have opinions. And it's been a great, great, great experience. So that's it for me at this point. So I'll hand it back to Christine for our next
You are now
presentation.
unmuted.
Thanks, Mary Jo. That was fantastic. I'm now going to switch it over to Troy and Dan. And just remember, if you have any questions for Mary Jo or for Troy and Dan, feel free to ask them in the chat area of the webinar software. And then I'll ask them at the end. Also note that I will include in the email I sent to you with the recording of this webinar, the links to their presentations. Okay. Troy and Dan, take it away.
Hi, how you doing? This is Dan.
You are now muted.
I'll be doing the first part of this presentation, and then Troy will jump in with the techie stuff. As you can see from our agenda, we're going to start with the nuts and bolts of how you get a podcast rolling, and then how you get this great sound, as well as build into how you get the word out. So basically, the podcast came up with us sitting around the lunchroom, and that's me, Troy, and a few others on staff were bouncing it around, and then continued on with conversations. Basically, the conversations were, can we do this? Do we have the time to do this? Do we have the resources to do this? And really, are we going to be wasting our time? And everybody came up with the idea that, no, you're not wasting your time, but you're doing it, Dan and Troy, because it's your idea. And that's how usually these projects get started. What we did, though, is that we had to discover what we wanted to talk about. Now, at the Reuther Library, we are the largest labor archive in the country. We also have numerous materials on the history of Detroit, modern history of Detroit, as well as the university itself. So we wanted to figure out how we can get these stories out. So at first, we do have people that come in on scholarships and grants, and that's called the Fishman Grant, as well as the Albert Shanker Scholarship. And so we have scholars already here doing stuff, and they are more than welcome to start talking about their stuff. So we already had that built in. We wanted to talk to other archivists about the stories, of course, in our stacks. And then we decided also on the lower peg, really we wanted to talk about what archives do, because you still get that question, what exactly do you do? And so this will be another tool to help raise awareness of what archivists do. We also had to come up with the idea of when you were going to do these podcasts. You just can't keep rolling them out every day or once a week. One, we don't have the money. Two, we don't have the staff, and we have other jobs. So we really came up with the idea of doing at least once a month, once every 3 weeks. And after toying with it, it's now every 2 to 3 weeks. And the biggest question, though, is why are you going to do this? Why does anybody want to put themselves through the learning curve, as well as preparation, as well as the anxiety of, oh my God, I'm going to do a podcast? Is to extend the audience, of course. Podcasting is a medium that is very popular. I read recently that there is about 400,000 podcasts out there. And only 60,000 are active. And they're very popular because they're the long-form entertainment that we've been craving in a short-term narrative that everybody's been receiving nowadays, from tweets to texts to short-order news items. This is the long-form. And we get our stories out there. We understand what the labor is, what Detroit is, what Wayne State history is. The thing is, how do we do it, though? So just to jump into our the lunchroom idea, first you got to get permission. And the only permission we really had to go through is we laid out our mission of what we wanted to do. We laid out how we're going to do it. And to get the permission, all we had to do is to go to the director. And the director basically said, here's enough rope. Hang yourself with it if you want to. But don't get too political. Now, it's kind of hard to do in the labor archives since basically everything we have is political. But we've been pretty good so far. And believe it or not, we went to the communications at Wayne State University and asked if there's anything that we need to do to follow any standards. And believe it or not, Wayne State University just said, go ahead, go for it. They have nothing really set up to follow along. But then again, every institution probably does have some standards that will be created soon or already have. So please always check with the higher ups before you launch into this. The money part was actually not bad. Troy and I are soft money people here. We're called subsidy positions, and our institutions actually gave us microphones to go do oral histories around the country. So we already had that equipment. And as Mary Jo said before, thank you, Mary Jo, that was a great presentation, by the way, that it just goes, you have the microphones, you have your laptop, and you have your equipment. So what we started out was basically we were doing it on the cheap. And once we started building up, we were able to prove to the budget committees that we need more microphones. We need this. And they say, you know what? Your tallies are showing that people are listening. So we will do that. Troy will get into the hosting service, and, there's some free and to $15 a month of paying for a hosting service. The other thing that we do is you always have to be ready to prepare your content months ahead of time. That means you want to at least have your ideas of who you're interviewing months ahead so you can go back and edit if you need to. Also balancing the calendars and making sure that you have a couple in the can, as we say, already. So you're not scrambling to have the next episode loaded up that next week. You already have stuff lined up already. We decided that our episodes would be roughly 15 to 30 minutes. Researchers love to talk, historians love to talk about their projects, and the PhD candidates love to express what they're doing. So you have that. The archivists, on the other hand, they keep it straight to the point in about like 5-10 minutes. So we're averaging somewhere between 30 to 15 minutes. And with a lot of editing, we can get it down. Also, we decided we needed a theme music, like every podcast seems to have a nice music intro and outro. So we're lucky enough to have a guy on staff who knows music. He did it for us, but there's plenty of open source music things that are out there that you can use. Before we were launched, we were going to hopefully do a launch coinciding with graduation. And we ran into little troubles with getting everything up and going on iTunes and these other services. It takes a little while in figuring out, but we eventually did figure it out, but we couldn't launch it that timing for it. But once you get through all these hookups, everything pretty much flies by. We are now pretty much flowing every 3 weeks with podcasts, and it seems to be going very well. Now I'm going to turn it over to Troy.
Hi, Dan. I am the de facto audio engineer for our podcast. I started using Audacity to record and edit my oral history interviews that I conduct for the Society of Women Engineers. So I already had some basic background knowledge of recording in Audacity and editing in Audacity. So I decided that I wanted this podcast to sound like NPR. I wanted nice, beautiful audio, but we don't have an NPR budget. We have a cable access budget, So I spent some time doing some background research to find, to extend my knowledge and to discover, or to help form, help me understand the technical side of audio editing, so that I could get the best sound possible. Some great resources are NPR Training, which is a website that NPR reporters use, and Transom, which is another website and organization that trains public radio people. Some other great resources are Bellow Collective, which is a website advocating for podcasts, reviewing podcasts, promoting podcasts, and it was one of the founders of Bellow Collective was an audiovisual archivist, which I appreciate. There is a podcast called the Audacity to Podcast, which is bit of an overblown title, but it is very good if you're using Audacity to record and edit. Sonic Ed Scotland provided some great technical information on acoustics, as did an MIT OpenCourseWare class. So to get as close to NPR sound as I could with a cable access budget, we used my laptop computer, which is a Mac. We use ATR 2100 USB microphones. Those are from Audio-Technica. And they retail for about $70. We use these microphones because my donor gave me one for free. And then I did have the Reuther buy a second one. And these are microphones that plug in via USB into my computer. We use pop filters to reduce the P plosives and the sound of of people's voices rushing at the microphone. And then I bought a microphone suspension boom stand, which I currently have connected to a library book cart. And so that gets the microphone off the table. So when our speakers are talking and they're emphasizing their points by smacking the table, it's not jostling the microphone. And then, as I just referenced, I have what I call the mobile podcast studio, which is probably the worst book cart we have at the Reuther. And I've attached the microphone boom stands and the pop filters to it, and then I can wheel it around to whatever room happens to be empty when we're doing an interview, because we don't have a set location really. And then as I mentioned before, I use Audacity to record and to edit the interviews. And I use Audacity because I was already familiar with it. The great thing about Audacity is that it is free. It is not always the most user-friendly or intuitive, but it is free. So using Audacity, I can record directly to my computer using USB microphones. With a bit of hacking, you can, if you have two USB ports, you can plug in two microphones and so record two different people. I use Audacity to edit the audio and improve the sound quality, to overlay music, to edit out things that Dan said that probably shouldn't be aired on, probably shouldn't be aired for the public. And I use Audacity. I had one interviewee who spoke at great length about a very interesting subject, but she kept on jumping back and forth in time. And I used Audacity to try to to cut out parts and put them in different places so that it would be less, it would make more sense to people. Audacity does have lots of sufficient documentation, and there's lots of user how-to videos online. As I mentioned, there's the Audacity to podcast, which was helpful. And so basically, Audacity is good enough for us. And if you did want to, or wanted to explore using Audacity to record and edit your podcast, Dan and I and our colleague Mary Wallace did a presentation at the 2018 Michigan Archival Association annual meeting titled, "I'm Not an Audio Engineer, I Just Play One in the Archives." That presentation is available. You can download it at www.bit.ly/podcasttales. So if you go to that link, it's a folder that will take you to this presentation and I'm Not an Audio Engineer. And in that presentation, I talk in more detail about recording in Audacity, improving the sound of your recordings, such as noise reduction, clip fix, improving the tone and removing echoes with EQ, dynamics processing, and adjusting the loudness so that the end volume of your podcast is of a reasonable level. And I also talk about mixing sound to create the finished episode. So if you want to know more about recording in Audacity, go to this link here. That will that will take you to 80 plus slides. And then a few other things. When you record your audio, the resulting audio file should meet some basic technical specs. So you should record the audio at 96 kilobytes per second is okay. 124 kilobytes per second is even better, especially if you have any music involved. Record it in mono because iTunes won't air stereo podcasts anyway. Record at a 44.1 kilohertz sample rate. And so for those technical specs, you could record at a higher fidelity, but you don't really need to for speech. And if you recorded at a higher fidelity, your file sizes would be larger. And that can be problematic depending on your hosting service, which we will get into later. And then, of course, you need metadata. So theoretically, you can add metadata to your podcast episode in Audacity. To do so, you have to create a metadata template with crosswalks to the ID3v2 tags that is the standard that iTunes uses. Theoretically, you could also do this by opening the file and editing the metadata in iTunes. And I say theoretically because both of those ways failed miserably for me. So I did some research online using these two resources from PrestoPod and then an article from LifeWire. And I just paid $15 to download software called ID3 Editor. And that has saved me a lot of time. I spent probably an hour or two trying to figure out adding metadata in Audacity and iTunes, and I gave up, and ID3 Editor, I figured it out in, 3 minutes. So it was $15, but it saved me time. And then once you have an episode file, you have to put it on a server somewhere. And we thought that we had a server that could do this. We had an Apple server from, I think it was about 2011, that we weren't at the Reuther. We weren't really using it anymore. And our digital resources specialist, Paul, said, hey, you can use this server. It has a podcasting function built into it, and we can do it for free. And we thought that was great. But it didn't, even though it was an Apple server, it was several years old, and it didn't talk to Apple Podcasts and iTunes Now. And Paul spent many days trying to figure it out, and we gave up. So what you will need, if you want to try using your own server, be sure to check out the Apple Podcast Connect's requirements for what your server needs to do. We thought we could do it, and we could not. So then we had to find a hosting service. So, there are free hosting services. There are professional hosting services, and the cost can get up to like $30 a month if you are posting a podcast every day. So in choosing a service, ask yourself, how many minutes or megabytes do you think you would upload every month? And using the file specs that I suggested in the other slide, you can estimate about 1 megabyte per minute of podcast. So if you have a 30-minute episode, that would use about 30 megabytes. And then ask yourself, do the services limit the storage size of your back catalog? Or, is there a limit to the number of old episodes that you can have and that people can go back and listen to? Do you need a website for your podcast as well, or do you just need an RSS feed that iTunes and Spotify and Google Play and all those services can refer to? Do you need statistics, and can that service provide you with statistics, and how good are the statistics? How easy is it to migrate to a different service if you want to change services, if you need to go to a better service that provides you with more storage space, or provide you with less storage space? And most importantly, does the service help you get listed in iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, etc.? There are lots and lots and lots of podcast hosting services. Here are some popular ones. Blueberry, which is the one that we use, and that's Blueberry with no E's in it. Libsyn. Podbean is really cheap at $3 a month. SoundCloud is pretty popular for music, but some people use it for podcasts as well. And then Spreaker uses a different type of fee structure. So you can store 100 hours of audio. You pay $54 a year flat rate, and you can store up to 100 hours of audio. And once you reach that amount, you have to pay more per year for the next package. So we use Blueberry. Blueberry gets us 100 megabytes per month for $12 a month. We also have a WordPress site here. This is the back end of the WordPress site, which when it's published will look like this. And this is a preview right here of our Noel Night episode, which goes live on Thanksgiving Day. So once you find a hosting server or a hosting service, then you can broadcast your podcast to the world. So what you need is an RSS feed, which would be provided by the hosting service. You need some cover art, you need a file, an audio file with metadata. And all of those things need to meet Apple Podcast specifications, and that's really important. There were many reasons why we did not get our episode that we recorded on the Wayne State commencement live in time, and one of the reasons was because the cover art that I had created was the wrong size, and Apple would not publish our podcast because the cover art was the wrong size. If I recommend this website called podcastinginsights.com. They have a podcast distribution guide, which will help you to walk through the process of getting your podcast listed in all the various apps and directories. Your podcast hosting service may help you to do that. Blueberry helped me. It kind of walked me through the process of getting my podcast in iTunes, and then getting it into Spotify, and then getting it into Google Play and Stitcher and TuneIn. So it walked me through that process. You can also do it individually if your podcasting service doesn't help you do that. You can do it individually. You have to go to Apple Podcasts Connect. You have to create an iTunes login. And then upload your podcast, and Apple, I don't know if it's done by an actual person or software, but they have to verify your podcast. And that can take a few days. Now, the cool thing is that once you get your podcast loaded into Apple Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts or iTunes, it's just reading the RSS feed from your hosting server. But once you get it loaded into Apple Podcasts, a lot of other services copy Apple's and the iTunes directory. So once you get it there, and about a large percentage of our traffic comes from iTunes, once you get it in iTunes, a lot of other services will pick it up quickly.
Okay.
Dan.
Remember, this is fun. You're supposed to have a lot of fun with this and explore various ways to get your content out there. And one way we always do basically archives, libraries, museums, we rely on anniversaries and events. It seems to always hit with the public, and we're always looking at that. So that's our lifeblood. So all along with podcasts, we're doing the same. We just had a Halloween special. That was a fun one. That actually got a lot of downloads. We did an episode with the beginning of school about teacher walkouts that happened in 1933 and not just this past year. So there's a little history thing. Upcoming, we'll be having someone who will be she talked about school finance, kind of a dry topic, but she did a great job. And we're going to do that on, tax day. And soon coming up as well on Pay Equity Day, we're going to have an episode on AFSCME's Pay Equity campaign. So we're always looking for those kind of hooks, because once you get that hook in, then you can start tagging them with the organizations and by using social media. Because everybody's trending, let's say, Pi Day, something on that on social media. And so there you go. You have more listeners coming in. One thing, all right, we did contact Wayne State University Communications and asked if they had anything. And as I said, they didn't have anything lined up that we had to follow by the standards. But then also they forgot about us as well, and we forgot about them. So with your parent organization, your university or your school district, let them know you're doing it so they can advertise as well to as many people as possible, because they have a wider audience as well usually. They're sending out the newsletters, they're sending out the email blasts. And so now we're on the email blasts that go out weekly today at Wayne. Another good thing, all right, we have the built-in researchers coming in. They're from different institutions. So when we post those podcasts, there's your guest interview. There's the big bonus, because now this information that you're putting out from Wayne State University could also be broadcast by their PR at UCLA or at NYU. These are your guests who are coming in and exposing you as well. So you're constantly looking at the other angle of getting more listeners, exposing your collections, exposing your podcast. Because you got to remember, this is why you started doing this, to educate and to make available your information that's hidden behind your walls at your archive.
Okay, so if you build the podcast, will people listen to it? Our service provides statistics, and different services will track statistics in different ways, so keep that in mind. There's a difference between downloads, unique downloads, and actual listens. And also Spotify and Google Play cache the audio files, and those aren't reflected in the RSS stats that places like like Blueberry tracks. So if you need to get statistics, check with your podcast hosting service to see what statistics they can offer. You can use Google Analytics to track your website if you have a podcast website. There is a service called PodTrack that I ran across while preparing this presentation, and I looked at it. It's a free service to track your podcast statistics, but I didn't really understand how to set it up, so I'll investigate that more later. And then you can also log into each individual service. You can log into Google Play, you can log into Spotify, so that's another way how to do it. And so we have done published 13 episodes, I believe, and the 14th it will be airing this Thursday. And as of this morning, we had 1,021 unique downloads. So we average more than 70 listeners per episode, and some of our listens have over 100. One of them had like 130 listens. Most of our listeners are in Michigan, but we do have listeners and scattered around the country. And you will notice that there are spikes on the days when the podcast airs. That's when, if people have subscribed to the podcast, that is, the day when everyone's podcast app automatically downloads it. But you'll see some secondary spikes when our outreach archivists talked about the podcast on social media. And I'm missing, over here we have countries. So most of our listeners are in the United States, but we do have some listeners around the world. And if you have any questions, this is us.
You are now unmuted.
Great. Thank you so much, Troy and Dan. Does anyone have any questions for Mary Jo, for Troy, or for Dan about their podcasting or the process they use or the tools that they use? Well, thank you to all three of you for the time that you've taken today to share this information with us. And I'm going to be sharing the webinar link email soon, which will include the recording to this webinar, but will also include the links to their presentations. If you're listening to this as a recording, perhaps on our Wayne State University School of Information Sciences YouTube channel, then you'll be able to see those links within the description of your video recording. Also keep in mind, we do have a webinar coming up on December 5th on the topic of fake news, misinformation, and the role of libraries in helping communities kind of sort all of that out. We do have a question from Freeland. Freeland is asking, Dan, is this what you really look like?
I'm afraid so.
Well, everyone's commenting. I believe you guys can see the comments too, but everyone says it's great work that you're doing, and it really is. It's really interesting work, and I think it's becoming an increasingly effective way podcasting is to reach out to communities and to interact with our communities, no matter what type of library or archive that we're working in. So thank you again to the three of you for participating today. And this recording will be sent out to everyone within the next week. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.